always remember reading that many of the Jewish martyrs, that was the last thing that they said. And when I was younger and I would think about those things, I would think, how do you have the presence of mind when you're being flayed alive or whatever to keep saying that? And I mean, it's a great thing to think that you'll do, but how do you really have the presence of mind to say that when someone is killing you?
I think that's why we call religion a practice, spiritual practice.
Yeah. You keep working
you just,
at it.
you just train yourself, and sometimes, I mean, when the first time I felt our daughter kick, I said the Shehechianu, and why would I was asleep, so why? How did I know to do that? Just because it's that's my training, that's my practice. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So important prayer, not important prayer?
Most important.
Most important prayer. Yeah, very important prayer. And the Reform movement, actually, we stand up to say it because it's so important. And one of the ways we want to show you that it's so important is we stand up. So why do they teach us that it's so important? What does it teach? Oneness of God, one, right. So that's what we call it the watchword of our faith, that it's about monotheism. So what was really fascinating to me is when I was reading the Torah portion this week, is that the word Shema, the word hear, is mentioned 3 times in this Torah portion. 3 times, which makes some commentators wonder, and made me wonder, if in context, if the emphasis isn't so much on the oneness of God, but is actually on hearing. So the text says, the first time it says, and now Israel, Shema, hear the laws and rules that I am instructing you to observe. And then we hear again, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, the laws and the rules that I proclaim to you this day. And finally, the one we're familiar with, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So, going with this theme of, is it possible that hello David, welcome.
Sounds like a rabbi teaching in
We're talking about the Shema. So going with the theme that the Shema, the hearing part, might actually be the important part of the sentence, what else about the sentence construction? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. What about the sentence construction also could have us conclude that the important part's the hearing part? It's first. It's not Adonai Echad, Shema Yisrael. It doesn't say that. It says Shema Yisrael. Right? So, what is listening? What is shma'ing? What is it about?
We're supposed to hear.
We're supposed to hear. Okay. So that's true.
Be God's people.
Okay.
Do what He says.
Okay. So it's the relationship. It's the relationship between us and God. Yeah? Is that what you're talking? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And that listening is an important part of that relationship. Why is listening an important part of a relationship?
I think there's a difference between hearing and listening.
Can you talk about that? Because we translate it both ways.
I don't. Just from my own experience, I think that I can hear something. I can hear somebody talking to me, and I could be totally zoning out and not paying attention. But listening implies much more active participation and awareness and really being present.
And I think that's what the Hebrew is going for. Like when we're having a dialogue with each other and I hear you, I say Shemati. I heard you. So it's that Martin Buber that we talk about, the I thou. It's that intense hearing or listening. Really, really getting what someone's saying in your kishkis. That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
It made me think of 2 things. One, in Hebrew, when you say to pay attention, you say tamt lev, to give your heart. And you have to actively listen. You have to listen with your whole self. So I'm sure that there's some connection there. And I've noticed in the slang that young people use today, when somebody says something that they agree with, they say word, as though to say, I heard you, I understand, I get it.
They say word.
Word. So if you say something,
gotten that
you say something, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah,
it's
blah,
been
blah, to
going
me,
on
and
for
I'll say
years.
word.
Word.
That means, I get it, I hear you,
That's a new one on me.
I'm with you, man.
like it.
You know, whatever. It's the current generation.
It's already
It's the current
Oh my God.
generation's,
My
you
kids
know,
do that.
way of saying, I feel you. I feel what you're saying. Apparently, I feel you is already out, and this is the new thing.
Word.
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 Yeah.
So what does it mean to us today to Shema, to hear, in terms of Jewish practice, in terms of Jewish identity?
I think we have to keep hearing because it's so busy in this world today that it's a reminder. You know, I hadn't thought about it the way you put it before about the multiple times, and maybe the original authors were very good communicators in understanding that you have to hear certain things multiple times to absorb it. And so it was part of a repetition to make it a part of you.
Nice. So what do we have to do to enable that to happen?
Revisit it all the time.
Revisit it.
Pay attention.
Pay attention. You talked about engaging, right? Like I think like we if Judaism is just something that's kind of presented to us, or that we're like go to like a presentation, but don't actually take on in our lives, you know, then maybe we're not really shmying it. Maybe it's have to be more actively engaged in it to really hear it. Does
It's
that
like what
make
she said
sense?
about the difference between hearing and listening.
Yeah.
You can go to the doctor and your hearing is fine, but that doesn't mean that you're listening.
Yes.
And it has to be something that you participate in. Judaism is a very participatory religion. You can't go to the rabbi and confess your sins and be absolved by the rabbi. You have to make it right yourself before you go to Yom Kippur and ask God's forgiveness. You have to fix it up on your own. It's much more participatory, and in order to participate, you have to hear, you have to understand the directions, you have to take it, absorb it.
Thank you. That's really nice. One of the teachings in the Talmud is that Moses, God spoke the first two of the Ten Commandments so that everyone could hear, and then the next 8 only Moses heard, and then Moses passed them down, and then ever since then we've been hearing like these echoes and these reverberations, as if to say that holy language is different than our language. Like God's language is different than our language, and has this reverberation through eternity. That if we listen, if we shema, that we can hear. We can hear the voice of God somehow in our world, and there's also teaching in the Talmud that and also based in the Torah, this week's portion, that Moses says that not only were the people at Sinai there to witness God, but we were all there, all of us were there, and that the rabbis teach that the way in which we are there is through this voice that reverberates through the centuries. There's this lovely quotation from Rabbi Oren Hayen. Today, God's voice never sounds the way it did at Sinai, but the obligation for us to hear remains in force, and so we must remain attuned to the hum of God's presence in the world. And one more poem I'd like to share with you. This is from Marge Piercy's poem, The Via Hafta, and the Via Hafta actually follows the Shema in this week's Torah portion. And this is just an excerpt from it. We should love ourselves, for we are of God. Be quiet and listen to the still, small voice within that speaks in love. Open to that voice, hear it, heed it, and work for life. Let us remember and strive to be good. Let us remember to find what is holy within and without. So I thought it might be nice to conclude our teaching by all singing the Shema together. And then we could just take a minute, maybe just to stand and hear the all the sounds. Some will be people's voices, some will be birds that surround us. Does that sound good? Okay, so let's all rise.